Optical zoom pulled the scene into sharp focus. The forward mount, the bridge, the mast silhouette, signal flags, sailors moving across open stretches of deck. The vessel was no longer a distant shape on a screen. It was a fully controlled machine, under human command, pressing into a U.S. Navy defensive zone with no sign of turning away. Bridge-to-bridge warnings went out again. You are approaching a U.S. Navy formation at an unsafe distance. Alter course immediately. The reply came back late. There was no denial, no apology, not even the kind of professional acknowledgement normally expected under separation rules. Just a brief transmission claiming the ships were in international waters, with no mention of the shrinking distance, no explanation for the converging courses, and no reason why 3 Iranian naval vessels had chosen that exact moment to move inward together. What was left unsaid carried its own meaning. At 5:22, one of the escorts reported the new closest point of approach. Too close. No alarm followed, no dramatic reaction. The number simply moved across the net, and every commanding officer in the formation understood exactly what it meant. At that speed, with those angles, even one last-second maneuver could create collision danger, confusion over intent, or a chain of events that would force split-second decisions under extreme pressure. The destroyer screening closest to the lead Iranian contact now carried the heaviest burden. It had to protect the carrier's space, avoid overcommitting, and still remain ready if the other 2 ships used the moment to tighten from the flanks. The captain did not need many words. The ship's movement spoke for him. More speed, a cleaner angle, a firmer line between the threat and the carrier. Aboard Abraham Lincoln, preparations stayed calm but unmistakable. Flight deck crews secured exposed activity. Watch teams tracked every shift in bearing. Defensive systems moved to a higher state of readiness. Sailors on the outer decks watched through the bright morning glare as the escort screen drew tighter, forming a more deliberate shield around the carrier. No one was improvising. That made the tension even heavier. Everyone understood exactly what stage the encounter had reached. At 5:23, the Iranian warship on the port side made its first truly dangerous move. It did not rush straight in. That would have been easier to read. Instead, it angled toward a lane that forced the American screen to choose between preserving ideal spacing and blocking the intrusion immediately. It was a smart tactical move, designed to stretch the response across more than one axis. The answer came just as fast. The American ship on that side increased speed and crossed enough of the lane to close the opening. Not recklessly, not theatrically, just enough steel, just enough timing, just enough authority to make the message clear. You will not move through this formation on your terms. From above, the wakes would have looked like signatures. Iranian lines curving inward, American lines cutting across them. Not random traffic, not a bluff, but a real contest of seamanship and nerve. At 5:24, electronic support measures picked up another shift. One of the Iranian ships had changed its emissions profile. The report moved quickly through CIC. It was not yet the full signature of a launch sequence, but it was enough to shrink the margin even further. Sensors were active, intent was sharpening. The encounter was no longer defined only by hull movement and distance. Now, the invisible layer had changed too. The next bridge warning was the strongest yet. Iranian warship, alter course now. Maintain safe distance. You are creating a hazardous situation. No reply came back. Instead, the starboard side vessel edged in a little more. Not much, just enough. That had been the pattern all morning. Never quite enough to make the first move unavoidable, but more than enough to make restraint increasingly costly. At 5:25, the order went out that marked the next phase of the confrontation. Launch the helicopter. Within moments, the deck crew moved with practiced precision. On the edge of Abraham Lincoln's controlled center, a rotary wing aircraft was brought forward to lift the encounter into a new dimension. Until then, the Americans had managed the pressure from the surface. Now they were about to put eyes above it, because in the waters near Oman, the space around USS Abraham Lincoln was tightening, and the next move would not come from the sea alone. 5:26 local time. The helicopter rose as the 3 Iranian ships kept closing. Its rotors blurred above the deck of USS Abraham Lincoln, then the aircraft broke clean into the morning light and turned outward over the formation. From the surface, the encounter had already become dangerous. From the air, it became impossible to deny. The MH-60R climbed just high enough to open the full picture. Below, Abraham Lincoln held the center of the formation like a moving fortress, immense and steady, her wake cutting straight through the Arabian Sea east of Oman. Around her, the escort screen had tightened into a controlled defensive arc. Beyond that arc, 3 Iranian warships were no longer simply approaching. They were positioning. The center ship still held the most aggressive line to port. The second vessel continued bending inward in measured increments, probing for a seam in the screen. To starboard, the third kept a wider angle, preserving distance without giving up pressure. Seen from altitude, the pattern was unmistakable. This was not maritime clutter. It was coordinated compression. Inside the helicopter, the sensor feed began streaming back into the strike group's tactical network almost immediately. High-resolution optics swept across decks, superstructures, forward mounts, radar arrays, exposed crew positions, and wake patterns. Every meter of distance, every degree of heading, every change in posture. What radar had suggested, airborne eyes now confirmed. The Iranian ships were operating as a set. At 5:27, the helicopter passed its first full visual update. The lead vessel's forward mount remained trained off the center line, no longer resting in a neutral position. The portside ship showed visible movement near a combat station. The starboard vessel's radar was cycling faster than before. None of it had crossed the final threshold. All of it pushed the encounter closer to that edge. Air contact has visual on all three surface threats. The report was clinical. That only made the moment more dangerous. On Abraham Lincoln, no one needed dramatic language to understand what the helicopter had just provided. It had removed uncertainty, and at sea, uncertainty is sometimes the only thing that slows escalation. Bridge-to-bridge warnings continued. Iranian warships, you are closing a U.S. Navy formation at an unsafe distance. Alter course immediately. This time, the helicopter added its own voice. From above, the aircrew transmitted directly to the ships below, making it clear they were being observed from both surface and air. It was not an attack posture. It was deliberate overwatch, documented and unmistakable. A signal that every move from this point onward would be seen, recorded, and judged in real time. The answer from below was silence. At 5:28, the central Iranian ship accelerated again. Not dramatically. That would have been easier to interpret. Instead, it added just enough speed to cut reaction time across the entire formation. On the tactical display, the change looked minor. On the bridge of the screening destroyer directly in its path, it changed everything. The American ship ahead of the carrier adjusted course by degrees, placing itself more squarely between Abraham Lincoln and the tightening contact. Its turn was sharp enough to be unmistakable and controlled enough to remain professional. Steel moved between steel. No speeches, no warning fire, just a destroyer stepping directly into the line of pressure. From the helicopter camera, the wake geometry shifted immediately. The U.S. escort carved a cleaner blocking angle. The lead Iranian vessel now faced a choice: open the distance or keep pushing into a narrowing corridor with an American warship directly ahead. At 5:29, electronic support measures registered another change. One of the Iranian ships had begun intermittent targeting illumination. Not a full engagement sequence, not a sustained lock, but enough to be recognized as more than routine activity. Enough for the CI Watch team to revise its internal picture from aggressive maneuvering to behavior edging closer to pre-engagement posture. That report moved through the formation with the speed of electricity. On the destroyer screen, crews at defensive stations tightened their focus. On Abraham Lincoln, command teams rechecked timelines, angles, and authorities. In the helicopter, the aircrew held a steady orbit, watching the three ships below as though waiting for one visible act that would force the next American move. Then came the moment that pushed the entire encounter to the brink. At 5:30, the Iranian ship on the port side broke its measured pattern and turned harder inward. It was not a wide sweep, it was a sudden, decisive correction toward the formation's outer lane. The kind of move that makes safe water disappear fast and demands an immediate answer. The destroyer on that side responded almost at once, driving forward and closing the gap before the intrusion could develop into a crossing threat. For several seconds, the sea lane between them looked too narrow for reason. The helicopter dropped slightly lower. Its optics now captured sailors gathered near exposed sections of the Iranian deck, spray breaking over the bow. The forward mount still offset. The bow kept pushing into water that was no longer part of any routine approach. The American destroyer held its line with hard discipline, crossing just enough of the path to stop the move without creating a collision. This was the U.S. Navy at its most dangerous. Not loud, not reckless, but fully committed to controlling the shape of the confrontation. At 5:31, the lead Iranian warship did not pull away. Instead, it kept the pressure on and yawed just enough to preserve its firing angle while remaining at a distance that every surface warfare officer in the region would recognize as unacceptable. The starboard contact edged closer by another fraction. The portside ship stayed blocked, but it was still in the picture. 3 separate threats, 3 active angles, 1 carrier at the center. Inside the helicopter, the tactical coordinator made the call no one wanted to make too soon. Possible hostile intent. Possible not confirmed. That single word held the entire encounter in suspension because Nero Man, no shot had yet been fired. But from the air, from the escorts, and from the bridge of USS Abraham Lincoln, one reality had become impossible to dismiss. The next bad move would not look accidental. 5:32 local time. The U.S. Navy took the initiative. Up to that moment, the 3 Iranian warships had set the rhythm of the encounter. They had chosen the approach angles. They had shaped the compression. They had forced USS Abraham Lincoln and her escorts to absorb pressure minute after minute without breaking formation. That ended at 5:32. The first sign was subtle. On the tactical display inside Combat Information Center, the American destroyer guarding the carrier's forward arc shifted from reactive positioning to intercept geometry. Not defensive drift, not simple shielding. A deliberate move meant to seize the water directly ahead of the lead Iranian ship and force a choice. Screen unit moving to cut the lane. By the time that report reached every station, the order was already being carried out. Out on the water, the destroyer surged ahead with controlled speed, its bow cutting sharply through the morning sea, its wake widening behind it in a clean white fan. It did not rush the move, it did not overplay it. It placed itself exactly where it needed to be, between the most aggressive Iranian warship and the center of the carrier strike group. For the first time since the encounter began, the geometry shifted in America's favor. The lead Iranian ship no longer had open water ahead. It now faced an American warship crossing into its approach lane with calm mechanical certainty. To port, the second Iranian vessel still hovered near the edge of the formation's outer seam, but the destroyer on that side had already closed the gap and hardened the line. To starboard, the third vessel was still there, but its angle was no longer part of a tightening trap. It had become isolated pressure without a path through the center. The helicopter overhead captured the change clearly. From above, the wakes told the whole story. For several minutes, the Iranian ships had drawn converging arcs toward USS Abraham Lincoln. Now, the American escorts were cutting across those arcs and breaking them apart. The pattern no longer looked like 3 ships shaping the carrier's space. It looked like 3 warships being pushed out of a plan they could no longer control. At 5:33, the final warning was transmitted. It was not louder than the earlier ones. It did not need to be. Its authority came from posture, not volume. Iranian warship, alter course immediately. You are on a hazardous approach to a U.S. Navy formation. Change heading now. No acknowledgement came back. Instead, the lead ship held course for a few more seconds, just long enough to show that the pressure was not ending on its own. That was enough. Inside the strike group, every ship had already climbed to the edge of action. Sensors were locked, ranges were clean, authorities had been reviewed and understood. No one rushed, no one hesitated. The U.S. Navy responded the way it is trained to respond when uncertainty hardens into danger. The destroyer ahead of the formation increased speed again and tightened the block. Almost at the same moment, the helicopter dropped lower into a more imposing orbit, not attacking, not diving in, but placing visible American presence directly over the Iranian formation. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer a situation being monitored from a distance. It was being controlled from the surface and from the air at the same time. Then came the move that broke the standoff. At 5:34, the lead Iranian warship changed course. Not by much, just enough for American bridge teams to see the bow shift and the wake begin to widen away from its original line. It was not a retreat, it was not surrender, but it was the first real concession of water. And once that first line bent, the rest of the Iranian formation began to lose shape. The portside ship, which had spent the last several minutes probing for a crossing lane, was suddenly out of rhythm. Its inward pressure no longer matched the centerline threat. The destroyer shadowing it moved with immediate precision, stepping farther across the seam and denying any chance of a late cut-in. The Iranian vessel reduced speed, then drifted outward by degrees. To starboard, the third ship hesitated. That hesitation mattered. For most of the encounter, it had held a disciplined supporting angle, ready to exploit distraction or overreaction. But once the lead vessel gave up course and the portside ship lost its lane, the starboard contact was exposed for what it had become, a single warship without a synchronized entry point. It edged closer for a moment, then checked itself. The angle flattened. The pressure bled out of the move. The helicopter's video feed showed the shift in real time. Iranian wakes that had once bent inward now stretched wider and less decisively. American wakes remained sharp, controlled, and assertive. From altitude, the difference between coordinated pressure and broken momentum was impossible to miss. At 5:35, one of the Iranian ships shifted its radar again. This time, the change did not help them. The electronic signature was captured, logged, and fused with everything else the strike group had recorded throughout the encounter. Visual evidence, bridge warnings, approach lanes, heading changes, unsafe proximity, and combat posture. That was the real reversal. The 3 Iranian warships had approached USS Abraham Lincoln trying to create a moment of fear, confusion, or forced concession near Oman. Instead, they had exposed themselves under the full view of a carrier strike group that refused to panic. refused to overreact, and refused to surrender the initiative. At 5:36, USS Abraham Lincoln remained on course. That fact said more than any radio exchange could. The carrier had not been turned away. She had not been boxed in. She had not been forced into a disorderly defensive maneuver. She was still moving forward, huge and steady, while the warships that had tried to pressure her were now adjusting to an American-controlled piece of sea around them. Above, the helicopter kept the scene framed. Below, the escorts held their lanes. And near Oman, 3 Iranian warships learned one of the hardest truths in surface warfare. The U.S. Navy did not need to fire first to take control of the confrontation. 5:37 local time. Their attempt had failed. Not because the 3 Iranian warships had vanished. Not because the danger had suddenly drained from the water east of Oman. But because the shape of the encounter had changed, and everyone in the carrier strike group could now see who controlled that shape. USS Abraham Lincoln remained on her original track. That was the first fact that mattered. For more than 20 minutes, the 3 Iranian ships had pressed inward, changing angles, shrinking distance, testing seams in the escort screen, trying to force a reaction they could exploit. They had come fast enough to create danger, close enough to create ambiguity, and carefully enough to avoid crossing the line too early. But in the end, the formation around Abraham Lincoln had not broken. It had hardened. From above, the helicopter continued its orbit, feeding a steady stream of imagery into the tactical network. The view was clearer now than at any earlier point in the encounter. The lead Iranian ship, which had once held the most aggressive line, was no longer pointed into the carrier's path. Its bow had opened outward by a few critical degrees. The portside vessel had lost the lane it had been probing and was drifting wider into safer water. The starboard ship still lingered, still present, still dangerous in the way any armed warship remains dangerous at close distance, but its angle had flattened. The trap they had tried to build around Abraham Lincoln was gone. At 5:38, the American escorts adjusted again, not to retreat, not to celebrate, but to consolidate. The destroyer that had stepped into the lead ship's path kept its controlling position, matching course and speed with disciplined precision. The escort to port held the seam shut, leaving no opening for a sudden late maneuver. To starboard, the outer screen preserved enough spacing to prevent a fresh compression without stretching the formation too far. It was quiet work, technical work. The kind of work most people would miss if they were only looking for explosions. But that was where the real outcome had been decided. Surface warfare is not always measured by what gets hit. Sometimes it is measured by who keeps moving, who keeps formation, and who forces the other side to abandon its geometry first. At 5:39, another bridge transmission went out from the American side. Maintain safe distance. Do not close this formation. The message was sharp, formal, and backed by everything the Iranians had already seen. Blocking maneuvers, airborne overwatch, locked sensors, disciplined reaction, zero panic. This time, the Iranian response was shorter than before and even less useful. There was no attempt to explain the converging approach, no denial of unsafe maneuvers, no acknowledgement of posture or hazardous distance. Only the thinnest statement of presence, stripped of the pressure that had defined the earlier minutes. Because pressure only works while it still has leverage. At 5:40, the helicopter passed another visual update. Movement on the Iranian decks had slowed. The forward gun on the lead ship no longer held the same threatening offset. One vessel appeared to reduce speed slightly. Another ship widened its wake just enough to show it was easing outward. None of them wanted to appear as if they were backing off, but none of them were still pressing forward either. On board Abraham Lincoln, the tempo never fully returned to normal. Not completely, not yet. Watch teams stayed fully engaged. Defensive stations remained ready. The flight deck stayed tight and controlled. Every console inside the Combat Information Center still carried the weight of what had just happened. But something had changed. Now the situation was being handled from a position of American control, not endured under outside pressure. And at sea, that difference means everything. By 5:41, the strike group had what it needed. Every risky course change had been recorded. Every radio warning logged. Every shift in emissions captured. Every weapons posture, every wake pattern, every attempt to split the escort screen was now documented. Precise, time-stamped, and undeniable. The 3 Iranian warships had done more than fail to disrupt the carrier's movement. They had revealed how they operate under pressure, how they coordinate, how they push, how they react when blocked, and how quickly their formation loses cohesion once control shifts away from them. That was the second key outcome. They had come near Oman to test USS Abraham Lincoln. Instead, they had handed the U.S. Navy a real-time look at their tactics. At 5:42, the water around the carrier opened up a little more. It wasn't dramatic, no alarms marked the moment, no one announced it over the bridge. But the formation felt different. The closest pressure had eased. The escort screen no longer bent under converging lines. Abraham Lincoln continued forward through deep blue water, steady and unhurried, while the three warships that had tried to crowd her were now separated by distance, broken timing, and their own unsuccessful approach. From the helicopter's view, the final image was clear. The carrier remained centered and stable. The American escorts held clean, deliberate positions around her. Farther out, the Iranian ships no longer formed a coordinated pattern. They were simply three vessels on open water again. Armed, still a concern, still being tracked, but no longer shaping the encounter they had tried to create. At 5:43, the tactical summary moving through the strike group was as measured as everything else that morning. No damage to USS Abraham Lincoln, no breach of the escort screen, no loss of course, no loss of initiative. That was the outcome. Near Oman, 3 Iranian warships had attempted to compress, pressure, and unsettle a U.S. carrier strike group at close range. They did not disable a ship. They did not force a turn. They did not break the formation. What they actually did was reveal themselves to a Navy trained for the most demanding kind of encounter, the one that unfolds in the tense minutes before any shot is fired. USS Abraham Lincoln never stopped moving, and that is how it ended. 3 warships approached, aiming to trap a carrier near Oman. What they left behind was a clear example of how the U.S. Navy takes control without losing composure.